Good morning. Good morning to everybody. Looks like our crowd might be down a little bit. Just a little tad of snow may have scared a few people away, and that's okay. I've asked Dan Mayberry, if he would, to lead us in an opening prayer. Dan.
Let's bow. Heavenly Father, Holy God, we're so very thankful for the opportunity we have this morning to assemble and learn more about your word and worship you this morning. We're thankful for the weather. We ask your protection on those that were traveling out in the snow of our number. Have them safely arrive here and arrive back home as you see fit. Be with David now as he presents a portion of your word. Give him ready recollection of those things that he's prepared for us this morning. Be with us throughout this hour and the worship service to come. In Christ's name, amen.
Let me kind of tell you the plan that we have moving forward in this class. We probably will be wrapping James up maybe next week, depending on the comments. And then we're going to pick up and start in the book of Esther. I don't think it's been taught in here quite a while. According to my notes, I taught it 12 years ago in here, so it's been quite a while. Mike Weeks will be picking up. I'll be teaching through the end of April, and then Mike Weeks will be picking back up in the month of May. So if you say that we have studied Esther quicker than that, I've been in other classes, please let me know and I can change. But otherwise, we'll start with the book of Esther. Look forward to that study. We concluded last week chapter 4, and we actually covered verses 13 through 16, but let's cover it again, just kind of a summary of where we are, and I'll ask Brian, if you would, to go ahead and read that, please.
You say, today or tomorrow, we will go into such and such a city and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are but a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil.
We talked last week about some of the presumptions that we felt like people maybe took then and take now. We assume certain things because it's always been that way, and we won't cover that again. What I want to talk about is real quick, how important is it to make life plans? And I think this pertains not only to those of us that are older, but probably more so those people that maybe are a little younger. Independence and self-dependence is not all bad, but God must be a part of it. That's what it boils down to. Make sure, that God is a part of your plan, part of our plan, and then as we move forward, everything should work out just fine. In this context, they were not being condemned for careful planning, but for doing so without regards to God. You know, we still hear it some, but I remember growing up hearing it a lot more. And at the end of every prayer, y'all probably know what I'm getting ready to say. What was said a lot of times at the end of a prayer? That's it, Jim. If God wills. If it's God's will. If it's God's will to be done. Now, we don't have to say that for God to understand that we mean that in our minds when we're praying. But it never hurts to say that from time to time either, does it? Make sure that God is a part of our plan. Instead of just saying what you heard back in verse 13, we need to include the Lord in those plans. In the Arabian world, there is constantly heard the expression IMSH. I guess it's pronounced Imsh Allah, meaning if Allah wills. So if they say that to a false god, certainly we need to do that as well, of course. In Acts 18, verse 21, when Paul was leaving Ephesus, he said, I will return to you, what? If God wills. So people such as people that we need to be taking a look at, that are examples, certainly we need to understand that they did the same thing. Back in verse 16, read that again, if you would, Brian.
As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil.
It just suggests an attitude on their part to have a sufficiency without God. And in that, they showed arrogance. It's bad enough to feel they didn't need God, but it seemed like they were almost glorying in that type of attitude. Verse 17, Brian.
Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
I think probably all of us in this class that are older agree with one thing. Sins of commission don't get us as much, do they? Those things that used to attract us and used to be major temptations in our lives, and we all know, we're grown people here, we know what they are. Those don't tend to be as tempting as they once were. What is this talking about here? Sins of what? Omission. Things that I omit in my life that I should be doing. What does omission mean? Pretty simple, right? Almost a rhetorical question. What does it mean? Failure to do. Omit, right. Failure to do things. Omitting things. Not doing things that we need to be doing. It seems that most good people don't willfully commit sin, but I need to add we. We may omit things that we should be doing. It's always easy to say it, but y'all might be doing it, or they may be doing it. It's all of us, right? We're the ones that we're talking about here. We're the ones that are trying to learn from these lessons. Do we assume we are good just because we're not bad? What would be an example of that? Well, I'm here every service. Need to be, right? Forsake not assembling yourselves together. But other things outside of that, I'm not certain that I need to do all that I need to do and be that pleasing to God. There are things in David Brown's life that I know in the past and probably in the future that I should have done that I have not done. Whether it be talk to somebody that might be lost, or whether it's someone that's sick and I just get too lazy to go visit them, or whether it's someone that's lost a loved one and I don't go to show my respect. And those are just real simple examples. But those are examples, I think, of the way that we are not doing what we should be doing as fellow Christians to our brothers and sisters. In Titus chapter 3, verse 8, says, this is a trustworthy saying, and I want you to stress these things so that those who have trusted in God may be careful to devote themselves to doing what is good. These things are excellent and profitable for everyone. Again, do we assume that we are good just because we are not doing bad, is the question. Matthew 21:19 is a really intriguing verse, I think. Read that if you would, Brian.
Seeing a fig tree by the road, Jesus went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered.
You see, the Bible always uses examples, and did at that time that people understood. The fig tree was very prevalent. And most people would have known at that time that what's really interesting is that on a Palestinian fig tree, what appeared first, the leaves or the figs? The figs. The figs. So when Jesus saw this tree, he saw the leaves. He thought, well, of course he knew, but he used his example. If there's leaves there must be figs there too. In our lives, what would be the leaves? It's our cover-up. It's the way we pretend to be something that we're not. But when you get past those, you squeeze it and look at those, look at the limbs and look at the trunk, the leaves may hide that we don't really have figs. And what a great parable. Easy for us to understand is that we can't be like that. 1 second, Jim. It produces fruit then and then leaves. When Jesus saw the leaves, he assumed the fruit would be there. When he found out otherwise, he pronounced a curse on it. The Bible clearly points out the wicked does not always refer to bad things a person does. The Bible tells us that we are wicked if we do not do what we should do. What about the 1 talent man? It doesn't say he went out and spent that 1 talent on righteous living. What he did say was that that person was what? What's the word that he used to describe the 1 talent man? Wicked. That must have been your comment, was it, Jim? Oh, okay, okay. What about this one? Well, I knew I should have done, you fill in the blank, but it's too late now because that's already happened. Whether it be somebody you needed to be of help to. By deferring something we ought to do from day to day, we come to lessen its importance and soon to forget it altogether. Y'all agree with that? Pretty fair statement, I think. Procrastination unfortunately, is going to send a lot of people to their destruction on the day of judgment, putting off what they should be doing. Yes, Mr. Roosevelt?
That got to become a question that we should be asking ourselves. Am I examining myself daily to do what God have asked me to do?
Okay, very good. Good point. Anybody else? Any comments? And if you're visiting with us, please raise your hand. We'll bring a mic to you. We'd love to have any comments that you would like to make. Chapter 5. Hopefully you all have read chapter 5 and are prepared for any kind of discussion we might have. What's your answer? Because it's discussed a lot in this chapter. It's good. Davey says it's neither. It depends on their attitude. Yep, absolutely. Jim said it's the root of evil, the root of money. That's the love of money is the root of all evil. Yeah. We saw that in the young man that refused to sell all he had, right? Verses 1 through 3. Brian?
Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are now rotten, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days.
Now, it's important we point out one thing. When it talks about come now, it's the same come now that's used in chapter 4, verse 13, and it's to attract attention. You know, it's like, instead of saying hearken, it's come now. In other words, listen to me when I'm getting ready to tell you. But neither here nor anywhere else in the New Testament are the rich denounced or condemned simply because they're rich. Thank goodness there are people that are wealthy, right? Thank goodness. How do we think that we can meet our budget? It's because people that have been blessed by God, fortunately, are sharing those blessings with the church here at East Main, or wherever that situation might be. We are blessed to have some people that are members of the Lord's church that support programs all over the world. So obviously, riches in itself is not condemned, but it is certainly how we use it. What does it mean when it says that what miseries will come on them? What's he talking about? It says read verse 7. I'm getting a little ahead of you, Brian. Do you have your Bible open?
Verse 7.
Yes.
Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until he gets the early and late rains.
Read that if you would, Brian, please.
But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from faith and pierced themselves with many pangs.
Back up in verse 1, it says, Go to now, you rich men, weep and howl for your miseries. Why were they weeping and howling? And actually what that means, weep and howl, it means weep howling. You are crying and you're howling while you're doing so. How does that compare to chapter 4, verse 9? Can you read that for us, Brian?
4 verse 9.
Please.
Be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy to gloom.
Why were they howling and crying then? Because they were doing what? Starts with an R. R-E. They were repenting. They were sorry for what they did, so they were crying. They were howling. We're so sorry for what we've done. But why are they weeping and howling here? Because the loss of material things. We also read in verse 3, or verse 2, excuse me, about their clothing. He's predicting to them things that are going to happen. Their fine clothes will be worthless like a moth-eaten rug, and gold and silver will become worthless. Boy, it's just so easy for us today, David Brown included, to think about this is what he was talking to them about. But those fine clothes could be the same thing as what we have on today or what we live in or the cars that we drive. Obviously, it's a parallel to our lives. And the warning is don't let those type of things take precedent over things that are so important that are eternal. Even though gold and silver don't rust, James uses these words figuratively to describe the things that will become worthless. That's what he's basically saying. Verses 4 through 6. Oh, got a comment. Ms. Liz.
Could this passage also be talking about the physical versus spiritual? Because you can't take the worldly things with you. And so, therefore, somebody else is going to get it. We're not going to have it, but we're going to have nothing in the spiritual world.
I think it's exactly what he's paralleling to. Yes, ma'am. Good comment. Anybody else? Hold on just a second. Let me get this down to you.
Remember the stock market about 1920, 1919, when, 29 rather. I wasn't around then, so I didn't know. But there were a lot of people that committed suicide when they lost all their money that they had put in the stock market, and they were relying on it and not God.
Yes. Yeah, Roosevelt.
The sad thing is, even like today, even when we lose a loved one, we have people arguing over what's going to be left over and who's going to get what. And there's an old school saying, it's like, you can't take a U-Haul with you when you die. And it's like, why y'all picking all these things? These things going to pass.
Right. Very good. 4 through 6, Brian, please.
The wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you.
Who is he writing to? Who is he writing to in the general that we've talked about several times? Brethren. How many times we see the word brethren? So this would also apply in this case. He's talking to the brethren. Well, what in the world is he talking about when he says you kept back by fraud? What's he talking about? Let me get a mic to you, Jim. What does he mean? The wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts.
Well, it's how we can deal with our fellow man. If we get our gain through taking advantage of other people, we're robbing them. That's all it is to it. And the rich tend to be in that position, and it happens so many times that's how they became rich, is by taking advantage of the poor.
In the 1800s, maybe earlier, the very rich bought things that didn't pay for them. And so, like the middle class people who created and made and sold these goods were a lot of times doing without, because the rich people wouldn't pay their bills. And if they went to them, they just ignored them. And so that's kind of what that's the kind of person they're talking about here.
Yeah. We can go even further back than that. We can go back to Deuteronomy chapter 24. What do we find out in Deuteronomy chapter 24 is that if you had a servant or a laborer working in the field, when do you pay them? At the end of every day. And it appears that they were not doing that, and they had no recourse. We already talked about how the judges were unfair. We read about that, I believe it was back in chapter 2 or 3. So they didn't have really the courts to go to, because those were really built around people that were rich. The decisions were made for them. So they really didn't have any recourse. These wicked kept either part of or all of it back. And when you were in that situation, these people literally lived day to day. And they had to have ability to live on a daily basis by getting paid on a daily basis. When he uses the word the Lord of hosts, it's to represent God as the one who leads his heavenly host or armies to wreak havoc on the wicked rich who defrauded these poor workers. God always, it seems in the Bible, shows compassion on those that are less fortunate. And that's the example that we should use as well for our lifestyle. In verse 5, it says, "You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence." Another translation is, "You have lived delicately." This is another charge that James makes against the wicked rich, and that is their selfish manner of living. It suggests very extravagant lifestyles, but not giving back to those that were truly in need of things that the rich could have provided. So the question is today, how much is too much wealth? And it's an easy and yet a hard question to answer. It's too much wealth when you don't use it to the glory of God, but it's not too much wealth if you're sharing that and helping spread the gospel and helping those in need, etc. So it's a person-by-person examination for sure. In verse 6, "You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." There are two lines of thought here. Many think it refers to the death of Christ because he's called the righteous one in a couple of places in the Bible. But in this case, I think probably it's talking about generically the poor. You've condemned and murdered the righteous person, the poor, because it's what he's been talking about. The wicked rich were notorious for using their power to oppress their victims. Even hold just a second, Jim. Yes, sir.
Look at Jezebel. You remember her husband was wanting that piece of property close by, and she contrived a method of getting it for him, and she had people falsely accuse the owner of blasphemy, and then he was condemned, and then her husband was able to go and buy that field. That's exactly what you're talking about. That we've murdered righteous people to get what we want.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else? Yes. Let me get a mic to you, Minty. Right over here to Minty.
That phrase there, the last phrase you were talking about, my Bible has a reference to Acts 3, verse 14. "But you denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you."
Say it again. I'm sorry, Minty. Referring to what? I apologize. Referring to the verse 6?
Yes.
Okay.
You murdered the righteous person. That, my reference has, "But you denied the holy and righteous one and asked for a murderer to be granted to you," in reference to Christ.
Okay. Very good. Very good. And who's he speaking of, the murderer? Barabbas. Okay. Verses 7 and 8, Brian.
So be patient, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. The farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth and is patient about it until the crops receive the early and the late rains. You also should be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand.
Okay, let's kind of quit dissecting. I'm dissecting. Let's get a big picture here. So be patient, brothers. Again, brethren. But which brothers is he talking about have to be patient? The poor ones, right? The poor brethren. He says, be patient until the timing of the Lord. It's so important that James writes information here that is also encouraging to his readers, and this is one of those verses that would do so. Anybody that's a farmer knows how important it is. He talks about here seeing red. Be patient until the crops receive the early and the late rains. Well, those people would have known what he's talking about. Because in Palestine, the early rains were from October to February, and the latter rains were from March to the end of April. So he says, be patient. Those rains are coming. You got the early rains, you got the latter rains. He was using, of course, the analogy of actual rain into their lives to be patient, because something good is going to happen. Read that, Brian.
Just as a farmer has to be patient and wait on his crop, these poor people are encouraged to be patient and know their reward is coming. The harvest will overly compensate for the trials they are enduring.
Lucas Holman, is that true? Yes, please do. For those of you who don't know, he's our professional. Yeah.
No, I'm just a nerd. So it is interesting because he's trying to show stuff that people relate to at that time, because agriculture was so big. Everybody was so tied to it at that time. When you look at all the, the parable of the soils and things like that, everybody understood that. We're far away from agriculture that we don't really fully understand everything that kind of goes into it today. And I work with a lot of farmers in Wilson County, and they don't generally get paid until they harvest a crop. So they'll spend all kinds of money at the beginning of the year planting, soybeans or corn or whatever. They don't get paid until they harvest in October or, November. And that's even a gamble sometimes whether they're going to get it or not. Now, last year, we went 11 weeks without rain, and a lot of crops went down substantially. We saw pastures dying off and things like that. But this is very relatable to people who understand agriculture, and they understood it at that time.
Yeah, good point. Sure, Pettis could add to that if he wants to. Farming, and Brother Cooper's not in here; he's in another class, but he could certainly talk about the need for those kind of things. Brother Pettis, did you have a comment?
I've often said that someday there will be generations that will not understand parts of the Bible because of this. They don't understand that situation. And even today, I spoke to a group just this week, and I was trying to explain to them that right here in Rutherford County, we at one time had 2,000 dairy farms. Now there's one, and it happens to be on the grounds of the university. So this is where we are today as far as agriculture is concerned. I'm chairman of the Planning Commission here in Rutherford County, and we're in the process of working out what to do with land here in this county, and we're trying to preserve some land still available for farming. We have individuals that's fighting that don't want that. But yet, I think it shows right here, and anybody that's even had a garden understands this in some way. But I thought the last sentence that you have right there, the harvest will overly compensate for the trials they're enduring. If you're a farmer, you understand right quick, maybe. The word overly is what caught my attention right there. I grew up on a farm and I understand that. But all it takes is the problems of too much water, not enough water, incorrect planting, anything of that type can affect that final enduring there. And we as Christians have the same situation. If we don't follow the same things that we should be doing as a Christian, it'll affect that final harvest that we have to do.
Good point. Thank you, gentlemen. Anybody else? Over 2,000 years have passed, so why did he say this? He said the coming of the Lord is at hand. But he's coming back. Those poor Christians needed this as a reminder of encouragement. Is that an encouragement to us? Should be, yeah. Is it as encouraging to us as it would be to those people that were so destitute and so downtrodden and so abused? We talked about why is it that the poor seem to have more of an interest many times in spiritual things than those of us that are so very blessed. It's because that the reward that they see is so much more vivid maybe than what we see. Does that make sense? We're rewarded every day. I'm going to be rewarded with a gospel sermon without anyone trying to come in and attack me physically. I'm rewarded with having a nice lunch. We can go on, all of us can go on and on. I think that's what we're thinking about here. We need to think about this. These poor Christians needed this reminder as an encouragement to them that even though things are tough right now, they'll get better. Any other comments? Mark 13, verse 32 says, but concerning that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, not the Son, but only the Father. That's a topic in itself. Verse 9, Brian.
Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door.
Why would they grumble? Against the unfair master that we withhold their fair wages? And against brethren who chose to be unfair and sinful toward them? That's why I would be grumbling, right? But he's saying here, be careful. Don't grumble against one another. Who? Your brethren. Any other comments? Verse 10.
As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, think about the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord.
What's he doing here? Read that again, Brian, please.
As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, think about the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord.
He's saying, you think you got problems. You think you got problems. Let me tell you about the prophets and how they were treated. I think that's what he's talking about here in verse 10. Matthew 5:12 says, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Elijah, we can move on and on. One would think that the people would have wanted to hear what these men had to say back when they were prophesying, but that didn't happen. Jeremiah pleaded with the people and they wouldn't listen. Instead, they put him in a dungeon and they called him a traitor. So he's saying here, yeah, you've got it bad, but just remember there are other people that have come before you that have had it just as bad or maybe worse, and they are the prophets. Yes, Jim?
Throughout history, especially the Old Testament you brought about, we've killed the messenger when the message is not to suit us. And it's not their fault. They're just telling us what they've been charged to tell, and we shouldn't take it out on them. We need to be the one that's changing.
Well, that's a great point. Absolutely.
Also, the prophets themselves had to be patient because they are telling things that are going to happen in the future, and they might not even live to see it happen.
Yeah, another valid point. Very good. Anybody else? Thank you for your comments. Anybody? Verse 11, Brian.
Behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful.
I think again he's using a comparison here. He's using using Job. This is the only time, I didn't know this. This is the only time that Job is mentioned in the New Testament. Please correct me if I'm wrong. James would have been familiar with Job because all their lives Jewish Christians had read and heard of all of his agonies. So it was very easy for him to talk about this man. How did Job endure through what kind of trials? We know those were. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah, what he went through. Family's death. Even his wife told him to curse God. His friends turned on him. He lost material possessions, lost his sons. Sometimes we have a hard time understanding God's purpose for us as well. It's Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Read that, Brian, please.
And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose.
I think James also, we have to say that he was not unmerciful that they were going through this agony. He was just saying, yes, it's tough, but other people have gone through it. Sometimes let me throw this out too real quick. Sometimes I hear people saying maybe in prayers, and I'm certainly not questioning people's intent here, but they talk about how bless us through our persecutions, or I will hear people from the pulpit talk about how we're being persecuted. We don't know what persecution is, do we? We don't know what it is. What's persecution to me and you? Anybody, what is persecution? How am I being persecuted as a Christian? Because somebody says something that hurts my feelings? We don't know what persecution is, and I'm not trying to preach here. You all know that. Let me get a mic to you.
One way we're persecuted in this world is that people just don't believe there's really a God, or we're foolish to try to serve a God that they don't even believe exists. We made fun of. Everything that you see on commercials is you only live once. You may as well enjoy it. If it feels good, do it. If it makes you feel good, do it. It doesn't matter whether it's wrong. And that's the way we're persecuted today. But like you said, we're not physically persecuted like Job was. He lost everything. And then not only that, the second time when Satan was allowed to take his health, he was persecuted that way. And we have to remember that there's far more important things in our lives as eternal, our eternal life. We don't just die and that's the end of it. We will have to give an account of how we lived on this earth.
Right. Yes, Roosevelt.
Yes, I was reminded this week as I went to my auntie's funeral.
Hey, put your mic a little closer. No, it's on. Just a little.
I was reminded this week as I went to my auntie's funeral, and she was shot. And someone asked me in the family, how can you love your God and we're going through this? And I said, time and time, my God has been proving himself to be true. So I know that I can stand this. I don't know why we're going through it, but I know that God has been good to me.
Well, certainly sorry for your loss. Sad to hear that. Verse 12, Brian.
But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation.
So above all things, in other words, pay special attention to what I'm getting ready to say. It said above all things, and then he says what not to do. It appears it was a common practice when it was written to be disrespectful and use God's name the way it should not be used. And he's saying our yes or no should be sufficient. And again, that's a topic in itself, the way our God's name is used so quickly and so disrespectfully today. Of course, all oaths are not forbidden. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 13 says, for when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself. Prophets did so that he who blesses himself in the land shall bless himself by the God of truth. And he who tames an oath in the land shall swear by the God of truth. So we got 5 minutes left. This may take the whole time. If not, that's fine. Should we swear when we are giving testimony in the courtroom?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Do you have? And I'm asking that because I look for scripture, look for verses to try to endorse my answer. Maybe I didn't search far and high enough. What is the answer biblically to that question?
One thing that I take from that is you look at Jephthah and his vow about when I come back, and if you've been with me and give me victory, the first thing I see I'm giving to you. He's talking about not only not using bywords as far as God is concerned, but he's also telling us that when we say we're going to do something, we mean it. You know, when I was a kid, if you crossed your fingers behind your back and you said you were going to do something, that relieved you of that responsibility, you know, in so many people's minds. But in God's eyes, if we say we're going to do something, he expects us to do it. Otherwise, we've lied to God.
David,
Still looking for an answer. I don't
Just-
have one.
just one thing to note is it's per federal law, as I understand it, it's not required of U.S. citizens. If you're appearing in court or for a deposition, you can affirm that you're going to tell the truth. You don't have to swear on anything or touch anything.
Looking for a verse, guys. Anybody has one, that's what I'm looking for.
God expects us to tell the truth.
100% agree. I just see what it says. Do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes, no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. What does he mean by that? Was it just for that particular time that he's writing, or does it pertain to us today? Yes, Greg.
So I think the key there is that so you may not fall under condemnation. Back then, they would just casually swear oaths that they were going to do something or not do something or that type of thing. And, well, they obviously didn't keep all of those. And I believe that's what it's referring. It's the swearing by God and that type of thing, just flippantly, just casually, that is what is being condemned. And our yes should be yes and our no, no. That should be sufficient for most things. Now, swearing in at court, that puts another level on it, and you do not want to fall under condemnation. If you think about what you're actually saying, you're basically saying when you swear into court that I will tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. Well, you're saying that if I lie, then let God punish me. You don't want that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your comments. We won't split hairs over that anymore. Thank you very much. Verse 13, Brian.
Is anyone among you in trouble? Let them pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise.
I think that we overlook sometimes the first part we don't overlook. If anybody's in trouble, what do? Let them what? Well, what's the second part say? I bet you some of y'all may not carry a tin in a bucket like me, but I bet you going down the road sometimes you sing gospel songs. And I think because we are encouraged by doing that. It tells us here, is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. He's talking, James is writing to them and says, if you're happy, sing songs of praise, and we can do the same thing. It should be an encouragement to us to be able to do that. Songs have a way to soothe, do they not, at times? Listening to those words. So we are out of time. We will pick up next week with verse 14. And again, please read Esther chapter 1. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for your comments.